We're doing chapters 3 and 4 tonight. And if you remember from the first class, chapters 1, 2, and 3 are on doctrine, and 4, 5, and 6 are on living out the doctrine. So we actually sort of go over the hump today. We're going to end the doctrine and start how to live it out. So we'll sort of get both sides tonight. And we'll be talking primarily about mystery, eternity, unity, and truth from these 3 and 4. Starting with Ephesians 1 through 3. I looked at a couple of different Bible translations, because your translation might be slightly different than the one up here. This is the RSV. I go back and forth between the RSV and the NAV today. RSV is Revised Standard Version, NAV is New American Bible. This is the RSV version, and I don't know if we have any English majors in the room, but to me that's not an actual grammatical sentence. It doesn't say something, it's a part of a sentence. It still tells us something, but it's only part of a sentence, which is frustrating to me. For this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner for Christ Jesus on behalf of you Gentiles, assuming that you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you, how the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I have written briefly, something. That seems to be the intro to what is supposed to be happening. There's no verb there. It's frustrating to me. And I've looked through a couple of different Bible translations, and they're all the same thing. This looks like a sentence fragment. There's still a lot to be gleaned from this. We've already discussed that Paul was captive when he wrote Ephesians, so I won't be going over this. But I will mention the fact that he uses the word stewardship here. Depending on what translation you have, you might see that he has been entrusted with something or has a commission. The RSV says stewardship. The Greek word that is translated as stewardship here is oikonomia. What English word does that sound like? Oikonomia. Economy, right? My Greek pronunciation is not great. An oikonomeo was a steward for a house. They were responsible for all the household resources and finances and stuff like that. It sort of makes sense that would have ended up being economy. So that's where it starts from. But this stewardship means that he is saying that he is in possession of something entrusted for someone else. He's managing resources that aren't his. So that's what he's doing. It's basically where a person looks after another's affairs or resources, which, as we've gone through chapters 1, 2, and 3, we can see that Paul is doing that. Paul is, and we are, entrusted with gifts from God that are in some portion destined for ourselves, but also, if we are going to be good stewards of that, we're also entrusted to keep good care of it and be able to pass it on. So Paul is making that explicitly clear here. And that what we are stewards for is for the benefit of the church. So that goes on. The next word here is mystery. And I think it was chapter 1 I mentioned the fact that mystery was going to come up later. Now we talk about mystery. The mystery in the Bible, it's not something that's unknowable. We tend to think that the sacred mysteries, right, of the Mass. It's not something that's unknowable. It's just something that can only be known through revelation. It's only known when God chooses to reveal it. That's important. So a pastor I know refers to it as God's secrets. When he chooses to reveal it, when the time is right, in the fullness of time, that phrase, it comes about. So he says, God's grace has been given to me for you, how the mystery was made known to me by revelation. That's sort of the definition of mystery. It was made known to him by revelation. So that factors in. In this case, in this particular mystery he's talking about here, he's talking about what he's been talking about for the first couple of chapters here, which is the coming together of the whole world, the Gentiles being allowed into the church. That's what he's referring to. That's the mystery that neither the Jews nor the Gentiles knew for these many centuries up until this point in time. That has now finally been revealed when Christ comes and says, now it's open to the entire world. So the chosen people were there to get things started, to be on the lookout for the Messiah, and now everyone is invited in. And the way that the Gentiles are joined to the church is through their faith, which we covered at length last week. Yes?
My Bible has a dictionary at the back,
Mm-hmm.
and the word mystery has two meanings. One is the mystery unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Two is the mystery, a sacrament.
Okay. Well, both of those sort of fit in here. Something that's unknown, something that God hasn't revealed yet. The mystery of the sacrament is something that he has revealed.
This is a Catholic language. It's a language all of its own. It's not an English language. They have their own. This is the way, a mystery. It could be a sacrament.
Mm-hmm.
Who would know that unless they was in the dictionary?
Good thing it's in the back of your Bible. So it's a matter of what has been revealed. So what has been revealed can be a number of different things. In this particular case, he's talking specifically about the Gentiles are now able to come together. There's other mysteries that are revealed in different places. So both of those definitions are correct. They fit in with what I just said. Does that make sense? Good. Another example of mystery, as long as we're on it, there's one that as soon as I start hearing these words, I start thinking about something else. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. It's something we've heard before, especially this center section, this quote that said, what eye has not seen, ear has not heard, and what has not entered you. You're familiar with this phrase, right? But this is talking about mystery. This is, again, Paul talking to the Corinthians. And I did a couple of ellipses here to cut out some things that aren't really pertinent to this particular conversation. We speak with God's wisdom, mysterious. The word mystery is in here. God's wisdom, mysterious, hidden, which God predetermined before the ages for our glory. As it is written, what eye has not seen and ear has not heard, and what has not entered the human heart, what God has prepared for those who love him, this God has revealed to us through the Spirit. So we've got mystery, and we've got that God reveals it. It's the same thing. And this little section here, it took me a while to understand what this means. It's the first two lines, what eye has not seen, ear has not heard, and what has not entered the human heart. And then Paul or the translators don't throw in the word and what God has prepared for those who love him. Those things were unknown prior to being revealed when Jesus came and revealed what the plan was, I'm going to prepare a place for you, etc. So this mystery and that reveal is in there. Now, there's one more word in here that I've been asked about, which is that predetermined or predestined, right? Predestination. Where is he? He was asking about this. He's not going to be here for this.
We're having an air conditioner installed. It wasn't done.
Then you're going to have to remember all of this next section and be able to pass it along to him, because we're going to get a little into this predetermined predestination and how this factors in. So God predetermined this before the ages. So we're talking about God, we're talking about time. So let's talk about God and time and try and make sense of this concept of predestination. Because if you think about it, it's a tough one to wrap your head around, but it makes perfect sense. First of all, God does not experience time the same way we do. Okay? Jesus did while he was here, while he condescended and was with us. He experienced time the way we do. But God does not experience time the same way we do. He is in eternity. We tend to anthropomorphize things, which is that fancy word. I like the word. Anthropomorphize. You assign human traits to something to try and make sense of something. And it just sort of helps us, that air conditioner never liked us, right? So it finally decided, the air conditioner has no feelings, but you anthropomorphize it, right? You assign it human things to try and wrap your head around something that's well, perhaps you understand air conditioning, so I don't know. But in terms of God, sometimes we assign human traits that aren't appropriate. So we think that God walks through time the same way we do. He doesn't, okay? He has a unique overview of time. He is outside of time. If you go back to Genesis 1 and you read about the first 7 days of creation, you can read about the fact that God created time and space and energy and all sorts of things. In addition to the stars and the planets and the people and the birds of the air and all that kind of stuff. But if you start at the very beginning, he creates time and space. In order to create time, you have to be standing outside of time. So he doesn't experience time the same way we do. It's really important. It's hard to wrap your head around. I'm going to try to make this sense because it allows you to understand this idea of predetermined or predestined in a different way. So he sees all of history or any one of us as an entire entity at one time. He's not looking at us in slices of time. He sees, and John, you and I were talking about this after class last week. He sees all of us at one time as sort of as a block. And then, so he sees things differently. There's a, okay, didn't need to go there, but I'll get there. There's a story, I don't know if this is a fictional story or not, I'm recalling this from memory. I think it was made into a Christian movie, it might have been a Christian book to begin with, but the basic story, or the core part of the story, was a little girl who I think fell out of a tree and was pronounced dead, but then was revived 20 minutes later or something like that. I can't remember exactly the story, but the core part of it was that for that period of time, she was clinically dead, she went up to heaven and met her grandma, which she had never met in real life. And when she came back and she was discussing what had happened while she was asleep, she was describing to her mom that she had met grandma, and she starts explaining things that this little girl would never have known about grandma. Because I guess grandma died before she was born or something like that. I can't remember. But I don't remember all those details, and none of those details are important. This is the part that's important. The way the little girl described grandma as she met her in heaven was that grandma was an infant and a young girl and an adolescent and a young adult and a medium adult and an older adult all at the same time. When she looked at grandma, she saw all of that in one face. Now I hear that and I go, that's a good challenge to give to an artist. Draw that one, you know? How do you, and I can't actually picture it. I've tried several times to picture what that would look like, okay? All I've got is the description of it. But it gives us a tiny little glimpse of how God sees us. He sees us all at the same time because he's outside of time. Okay, I still think that would be a good challenge for an artist. Sketch that one. But it's an interesting thought, right? So it's all of this. So it's sort of like, well, getting back to time and not multiple faces all in one space. We're all going to choose something to have for lunch tomorrow. See, the thing is that God knows what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow. You have perfect, huh? You're going to skip lunch tomorrow?
I haven't a clue.
You haven't a clue, right? You haven't a clue. You haven't a clue, and tomorrow morning you'll wake up and something will be in your mind. Then somebody will call and say, change your mind or whatever. And at the last second you'll change a boat. But he knows now what you're going to have for lunch tomorrow. And it has that has nothing to do with him controlling your free will. You have the perfect free will to do that tomorrow. But because he's outside of time, he can see that already. Now, that word already is already anthropomorphizing, which is why I skipped ahead a little bit here. He doesn't already know, he just knows. Right? When you say he already knows, you're putting him in time again. It's very hard to describe this subject without getting tongue-tied, because every once in a while you start throwing in the word like already, or he knew back then. It's like, no, he didn't know back then, he just knows. He's outside of time. It's very hard for us to understand. We sort of, we're born here, and I'm going backwards. Here, I'll go for you guys. We're born here, we grow up, and we do different things, we go through our life, and we end up like this, and we're sort of marching through time. And we're seeing as we're on the playing field, we're always there. And we can always look back if our memories are pretty good and remember what was back there, but we got no clue what's up there. We just can't see there, right? We can only understand the present moment and what we can remember of the past. Because those past moments are gone, but we can remember them. But God is over top of that and can see your whole life at one glance. So he's not affecting your free will. You're going ahead and making those choices. And he may be interacting with you at times, but he's not affecting your free will. Unless it's a very strange case that may end up in the Bible someday, kind of thing, where he's directing your free will for a moment. But that's not the general case. You can just see it because he's standing outside of time. He's sort of up over the top of it. I already mentioned the term condescend. When Jesus condescended, con meaning with, descend, come down. When a human being condescends, that's not a good thing, because they feel they're over top of you. When God condescends, that's a good thing. He's coming down with us. So, you're going to ask a question?
Yes, if that's, I understand what you're saying. Okay, but how does Satan work in there with time? Does he have the concept that God has?
No.
No, so only he sees what's happening at the moment
Correct.
and distracting it from that way. God is seeing the whole picture.
Correct. God can see all of it. The angels have perfect understanding of what they're going off subject here for a moment. That's fine. They have perfect understanding of what they do and how it will affect things in terms of consequences, but they can't see forward and they can't see our inner thoughts or anything else like that. It's that's the reason why angels who rebel cannot be forgiven, because they have perfect knowledge of the consequences of their action. So when they rebel, they can't go to confession. We're imperfect. We have no idea a lot of times what consequences will come from our actions. Therefore, we can be forgiven. Sorry, a little bit of a digression there, but fit into what you were asking. So God condescends to interact with us in time, which is another strange thing. So once you start wrapping your head around the fact that he's outside of time, how does he get inside of time? And I don't have any analogy to go with that because it starts stretching the bounds of words, and that's the difficulty that goes on. But anything that we ever do, he already, there's that word again, he already has known since the beginning of time. Since the beginning of time, it's already factored in, and his knowledge doesn't interfere with our free will. He simply has access to the result of our free will. Okay, we still have the ability to make the choice. He's just outside of time. It's hard for us to wrap our head around, but it's important to understand when we're talking about that concept of a predetermination or predestination or knowing things, because it sounds like he's controlling us. I know what's going to happen. Just because you're outside of time. All of our prayers, every prayer, the prayers we've made already in our life, the prayer that you'll say tonight before you go to sleep, the prayer that you say a year from now, he's known since the beginning of time. And it's factored into his plan because he's outside of time. So all of those prayers are already known to him. It's part of the plan that's set up. Maybe there were things that were set up years ago in order to be able to answer your prayer that you'll say tonight. It's possible because he's known about it, even though you haven't thought up the prayer yet. He's known about it since the beginning of the universe. And even before that, because he existed before then, getting out of it. This is where words fail. The example that I give, or the example that I like, is think about your cell phone. What an incredible piece of machinery that is. You youngsters are, it's like you grew up with it. Us oldsters, this is like a really cool piece of technology that did not exist when we were your age. And it's amazing that this is there. But I can understand it because I'm close enough in time to understand it. Take this cell phone, go back to the 17th century, and take it to whatever the world scholar in Europe is, and show it to him and his buddies in the university. Access Google and ask the questions and do what all they pretend you've got cell service. Go through all that, show them all the fantastic, amazing things that a cell phone can do to a 17th century brilliant scholar, then put the cell phone back in your pocket and say, write a description of that. He wouldn't have the words. He's just seen it. He can't describe it. He literally doesn't have the vocabulary that would make that work. So he starts coming up with poetic language and describes it in flowery things that would sound silly, but those are the only words he's got because he's seen something that's so far out of his ability to comprehend. It's real, he just saw it, but it's more than what he can describe. That's sort of where we're stuck. Has anybody ever read a little bit or a lot of Revelation?
Yeah.
Okay. The title of that is the Revelation to St. John, right? He's seen a bit of heaven, now go describe it. Is there a lot of flowery language, poetic language, weird language? Okay? Imagine going to heaven and then God tasks you with, well, write your book report. I don't have the words. I'll do my best. Okay? So some of this, it goes beyond our comprehension and goes beyond the words. So does that concept of words fail me lead to the concept or related with the concept of predestination. It's possible. Okay? Does God decide where we go, or does he know where we go? Right? He knows whether or not you're going to end up in his good graces and his friend at the end of time. He's not forcing you to do that, he just knows. Well, when you use words that fail to fully convey the meaning, you might get those two things confused. Okay? There's an analogy. I don't even know what's next. There we go. I talked about that. I talked about that. I talked about that. I've been missing my clicks. I'm sorry, guys. I have a feeling the last one I got to wait for. So I'm going to. Oh, I know. Now I know what it is. I'm going to wait for this. So here's an analogy for me. I've done the father with the son teaching the son. I've done the father with the two sons. I'm going to do a father with the whole family. And I didn't mean to do it this way. It's just the way these analogies happen to flow with this. So picture a good human father. Okay, I always have to say good because some of us didn't have great fathers. Some of us didn't have fathers at all, like I did. Okay, so picture a good human father sitting around the table with his 8 children. Okay, obviously a good Catholic father. So sitting around the table with his 8 children and discussing their futures. Now, a good father would effectively say, perhaps not in these exact words, that I want all of you to succeed. I'm going to do everything I possibly can. Everything that's within my power, I'm going to help you. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to stand with you. I'm going to help you when you fall down. I'm going to do everything I possibly can. But it's going to be up to you ultimately whether or not you have a successful life or not. Right? That's a good human father. Okay? The folks that take predestination a bit too far presume to say that the father would say effectively to his 8 children, you're going to succeed, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to succeed, you're going to fail, you're going to fail, you're going to succeed. Is that 8 or 7? I can't remember. I can't remember if I got one more in the gun. I can't remember.
We didn't count.
But you get the point. The predestination crowd that take it a bit wrong, the double predestination crowd, thinks that God the Father is so cruel as to say to his children, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to heaven, irregardless of anything you do. Right? Because that's the predestination crowd. Absolutely independent of any good works you do, any faith you have, anything. It's all up to me. It's irresistible grace. Absolutely. And I reject that. I absolutely reject that. I don't think you can read the Bible and just read the Sermon on the Mount. He's telling us that what we do has import. Right? There's no way to read this and say in my opinion, there's no way to read this and say that God does everything. But I think it comes out of a noble thought, which is we give God the glory, and anything that you say that you do that contributes to your salvation, you're taking away from the glory of God. I think that's where it comes from. I think it comes from a noble place. And then you combine that with words aren't perfectly suited to describing this predestination concept, the fact that God is outside of time. Okay? Just like that 17th century scholar could not possibly describe your cell phone, well, the folks that wrote the Bible don't have the language of time travel and standing outside of time and doing all that kind of stuff. So they write in poetic terms. They have to, because that's all they've got. Okay? Even here we are 2,000 years later, and I'm still struggling to come up with the words, and we've got quantum physics. I still don't have the words for it, because it's an interesting way to look at things, to sort of look down on time, right? We can only just barely grasp that, but we can because we live in a bit more of a scientific age, so we have a little bit more grasp of those concepts. So anyway, my belief is that God knows in advance, right? Again, in advance with quotes around it, in advance what we are going to do, how we're going to end up living our lives. And so he knows in advance if we're going to end up with him forever. And then when things are worded and written down, it can be confused with, I am going to direct you to that. I am going to predestine that. No, I just happen to know that that's what it's going to be. Okay? So, going back to that human father sitting around the table with his 8 kids, another way to word that would be to say, if he was somehow to be able to time travel to the end of his kid's life and know whether or not they were successful or not, he might be able to come back and say, you know what? You chose the outcome. You chose how you're going to live your life. You chose, well, here. You chose your path. I just happen to know it. So if he was cruel, he would say to his kids, you succeed, you fail, you succeed, you fail, you succeed, you succeed. And he would be absolutely right. And he would not be interfering with their free will. He just would know the outcome ahead of time. Okay? Does any of that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. That is, it's tough to wrap your head around, but it helps to understand that predestination, that concept. In that sense, God has known for all eternity who the elect are. That phrase that shows up that says, the elect, who are the ones that will be going to heaven. Those are the elect. But because of not understanding that foreknowledge of God, you think, well, the elect, those are the people I'm choosing to go to heaven with me. No, those are the people that you know from all eternity. Before he created the Big Bang, before he created the universe, he knew already who was going to be there. Yes?
This is an interesting way of the problem of evil. God made the whole world outside of time and then said it was good. So that's why there's evil in the world, because ultimately God saw it all and he said it was good. So it has to work out as good, because
That's an interesting way to put it.
he said it was good and he's outside of it.
And he's saying the things that he created were good.
Yeah.
He did not create evil. But, and I don't mean to go down this road, if you get me going on free will, I can talk all night on free will. I love that subject. I love it. But it's possibly, in my opinion, the biggest gift God has given us. The ability to choose wrong. The ability to rebel against him. What supreme ruler would give power to the people to rebel? It's amazing. But free will is the only thing that makes love worthwhile. Right? If you had to love her because you had no choice, it wouldn't mean anything to you, would it? Okay? Well, it would mean far less. Okay? It'd be nice to get breakfast in bed every morning, but it wouldn't have the same resonance, because what makes love is the fact that it is freely given. You have to have the ability not to love in order that love has a meaning. Okay? So that free will is what allows for evil. He had to give us free will because we only get back to heaven through love. We only get to heaven through faith. Those two things require free will. I'm off free will because I'll go all night with that. Unless it's a question about free will, in which case I'll shut it down. But what are you going to ask? It's about free will, isn't it?
What about final judgment?
If I go off on that, we'll be off for a while. Let me see if I can fit that in either chapter 5 or chapter 6, because I've probably already started to run late. I'll final judgment. Remind me afterward. I'll write that down. I'll see if I can squeeze it in 5 or 6. Yes?
It was just a stumbling block with me about everything good in Genesis, beginning of Genesis, and everything was good when he created man and everything. And then all of a sudden he wiped everybody out and he said, okay, Noah, you convinced me to start again.
Well, what was the first thing he said was not good? Got to go back to Genesis 2 for that.
Meant to be alone.
Exactly. Not to be alone. Right? We're meant for communion, which goes back to Paul and goes back to Ephesians. We're meant to be in union. So Noah, I can't think as big as God thinks. There must be a part of the plan that says, in order for free will to exist, but for humanity to be purified, it's got to go through these stages. There's just no other way to do it because they're imperfect. So I'm going to give them all the help I can possibly give them, but that's where it's going. I'm getting way off track, so I'm going to get back on track.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes?
Is predestination, would that be similar to fate? Being fatalistic about something?
If you get into detailed descriptions of that, theological terms for fate versus predestination, they're different in that sense. The fates are something that controls the gods, fate, karma, all that kind of stuff. In this sense, when you're talking about predestination from God, you're talking about God taking a specific action in order to control the events. Okay? His plan is predestined. He took everything into account when he created his plan, but we still have the free will to roam around within that plan, and then he knows what the end result is. So it's different than fate. It's different than fate in that sense, because fate is sort of undirected, if you want to call it that. But it is proper to call it predestination. You just have to understand it properly to apply it properly. Okay, so that takes us through, I think, verse 13 or something like that. Verse 14 starts a beautiful prayer, the end of chapter 3, and the end of the doctrine section of Ephesians ends with the second of Paul's prayers. He had one at the end of chapter 1, and now he's got a second one, and he's praying this specifically for his readers, which would be us. In this sense, Paul is praying for us in this sense, and it's got 5 petitions. Okay, first, that we be strengthened with power through the Spirit. So the Spirit's giving us that power. The Greek word that's underneath power is dynamos, or something like that, which is dynamite. That's where we get dynamite from. Powerful stuff. That Christ may dwell in our hearts through faith. So we actually sort of participate a little bit in this one, right? Christ is dwelling in our hearts through faith. So going back to the wording that I used last week, if we adopt the worldview of Christ, that faith, if we believe, if we have been persuaded by Christ, if his words live within us, then we have faith. And then Christ will dwell within us. Don't confuse my words here. I said that out loud as I was going through this. I'm going, wait, that could be really confused. If I'm saying that the words and the worldview of Christ lives within us, and therefore Christ lives within us, that's not the right way to say that. And I caught myself when I said it. The fact that we adopt his worldview, the fact that we've been persuaded, the fact that we believe in him is what opens the door that allows Christ to enter. Okay? Does that make a distinction between what I said first time and second time? So that's the door. Again, I said last week, God is a gentleman. He won't force himself upon us. The enemy will. Okay? But God is a gentleman. So when we open our hearts through faith, Christ can dwell in our hearts. The third petition that Paul says in that prayer is that we comprehend the breadth, length, height, and depth. Breadth, length, height, and depth. Those. Anybody notice anything weird about that? I heard it. What did you say? Well, it's one more, right? We live in a 3-dimensional world, right? Here he's got breadth, length, height, and depth. And I looked at that, and being a math and science guy, I said, wait, 4 dimensions, what is that? And I thought immediately, because we were just talking about time, well, obviously he's thrown time in here. We're talking about now, he wants us to comprehend all of space-time, and that's not what he's talking about. But I got really excited about it when I saw that at the beginning. Breadth and length. The best way I have to mentally picture this, the breadth of a river and the length of a river, and then the height above the river and the depth below the river. Okay? But you notice that 2 of those dimensions are left and right, near and far, and then there's 1 dimension above and 1 dimension below. That really should be 1 dimension, right? But again, scientifically, they weren't sort of on a par with us. We think of that as 1 dimension, right? But I guess from wherever ground level is, up is 1 dimension. If whatever ground level is below is a separate dimension. And the heights are up to heaven, and the depths are down to mystery. The words underneath, the Greek words underneath that talk about that. So it ends up being 4 dimensions, but it's not time. I got really tickled that it was going to be, but it's not. Fourth petition is that we, the readers, know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. Anytime I hear that phrase, I love that phrase, that surpasses knowledge. What have we just been talking about? The word, the concepts that surpass the ability to explain it in words, even though I gave it a shot. And some of you nodded your head like I might have, tickled something that makes a little bit of a sense. What I love is that I'd love to talk about the word love, but we'll talk about the word love a lot next week. Surpasses knowledge. The word, did I write the word down? Oh, yes, I did. The Greek word underneath surpasses is hyperbalusan. Hyper, past, right? More than hyper. Balusan is where you get the word ballistic, which comes from the ancient Greek of to throw something. Okay? You can see how that connects, right? So hyperbalusan is past that which you can throw. I just love breaking down the Greek sometimes because it just adds so much texture to these words. So to know the love of Christ that is farther than you can throw. It's just a beautiful, poetic way to say it, okay, in the original Greek. Not that I'm a Greek scholar by any stretch of the imagination. I just love picking apart these words sometimes. It's fun. And then he asks all of these so that we may be filled with all the fullness of God. And that's just a beautiful prayer that Paul prays for us. Let me see on that. Okay. So that's that. So of these 5 petitions, just take a look at them and ask yourself, which one, or perhaps more of these, do you need? Which one of these are you hoping that Paul really put an arrow, put a target on your back and God said, oh, that's what they need? Which one of these petitions that you need? Which one of these petitions are you asking for in your own life? Which one of these maybe you're avoiding asking for? I don't know. Okay? But if you look at verse 20, okay, going a little bit past part of the prayer. Verse 20 there talks about now to him, he's wrapping it up, now to him who by the power at work within us is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. So God has no problem granting any of these. We just have to ask. And if we ask tonight, God will have known from the beginning of time, and he will set things in motion that make it work. If he so chooses, if it makes sense and it's in line with his will. It's got to be in line with his will. But yes?
If we had to pick one, I'd pick the last one because then it would take all the others into it.
This is true. Well, that's why the end one is so that, because you got to get all these so that, right? So that's a good tricky way to get all the rest of them. Right? Pick the last one, which is all of the above, right? That's the answer E, all of the above. Okay, so switching now, we've now finished off chapter 3, which is all on doctrine and theology and all that stuff, and we're going to switch to Ephesians 4, which is where Paul starts exhorting us to live this way. And the way he starts it with verse 1, 2, and 3 is beautiful, I think. I, therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, we've already discussed that, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all lowliness and meekness, with patience, forbearing one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. It's beautiful. What stuck out to me, and I swear, I did not do this on purpose. This just happens to work out with what we talked about last week. I hadn't read this yet and started putting my notes together, but I used another Bible verse that last week that ties into this. We look at this, the first two adjectives he uses here, okay? With all lowliness and meekness. He's calling us to another word for lowliness is humility, okay? So with all humility or humble heart and meekness is what he's calling us to. Now, I used a Bible verse last week, and I used the beginning of the Bible verse, and I didn't use the end of it, and the end of it talks about humility and weakness. 5 points for anybody who knows which one I'm talking about. I didn't know.
Galatians.
Huh?
You have what Galatians?
No, it wasn't Galatians. It's one of the Gospels. I mentioned Matthew 11:29. The beginning of it was what I talked about. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Remember that? Right? Having the same worldview, having the double yoke over the two oxen, making sure they have the same worldview. I didn't use the end of that verse, which is, for I am meek and humble of heart. I don't know if the following fact is actually a fact. It's what I remember, and I don't know for sure, but I think I remember hearing one time that this is the only time that Christ described himself in terms of adjectives. I think, okay? Of course, Son of God and all of those things. But as far as his personal character, I think this is the only time he described it. And look, same two things up here. Meek, lowliness, humble of heart. Lowliness, this could also be translated as humility or humble of heart. Okay? So, obviously those two are kind of important. Seeing as Paul leads off with these, I'll make mention of these two. First of all, humility. Something we don't think about. Humility, back in those days, in the pagan world, was an attribute of the human character that was despised by the pagans. We think of humility and we think, what a great person. That is something to strive for. For them, it was absolutely the opposite. This was a despicable trait. Okay? So to be promoting this while he's going out to the Gentiles, be humble of heart, be lowly, be humble, take on humility, was a stretch. Okay? It wasn't like he was promoting a virtue to them. So for him to lead off with that, it's amazing. Okay? Christians were the first people in the ancient world that considered it a virtue, the very first. And now look at the whole world. We all think humility is a great virtue, because it is. I recently heard someone ask, what is the opposite of pride? Okay? And most often the answer is humility, right? Pride, humility. Okay? But the person said that the opposite of pride to them is reverence. And it comes from the same place. Okay? Being humble, the word comes from being low to the ground, close to the humus, the earth, or the dirt, or whatever the humus stands for. Okay, so that's where the humus, humble, humility all comes from. So if you are proud, you're up here looking down. And if you're humble, you're down there looking up to the Father. What was Christ doing all the time? Looking up to the Father. Okay? He was lowly, he was humble, and he was reverent. So the opposite of pride, in this person's opinion, is reverence. Not humility, but reverence. But it comes from the same place. It comes from being low to the ground. Okay? But it's the direction. Okay? So lowly people look up to the Father instead of relying on themselves. Therefore, the reverence. Now, meek. I love meek. How many of you saw happened to be around when Father John Ricardo was here? Okay? I love Father John Ricardo. I've been listening to him for 10 years. Just has some brilliant things, just a wealth of great information. And he described the word meek one time, and it stuck with me. If you were I'll tell you what Father John says in a second. If you were to describe meek, okay, in a word or two, or come up with a synonym, what would you come up with for meek?
Gentle.
Gentle. That's another way to translate it in some verses. Exactly. You picked the good one. If you were on Family Feud, you would have had the one that has like 89 people and there's like one other on us. So you would have ding ding, and then nobody else can. We'll pass. We'll give it to everybody else. So gentle is the other one. Okay, gentle is the other one. Okay, Father John describes it this way. Think about the last time you saw a movie about knights on horseback with, fighting it out with big broadswords on, horseback going through battle and lances and all that other kind of stuff. You can imagine the scene, okay? Now, think about what it's like to be that horse in the battle, okay? That horse has to be trained properly. The term for that is meeked. You meek a war horse. You take that incredible power, because those horses are huge compared to regular horses. You take that incredible power and you put it under control. That's what meek means. And ever since I heard Father John Ricardo say that, that's my definition for meek. That's it, power under control, which goes with gentle. Okay? Some of us in the room are old enough to remember the TV show Gentle Ben, which was a bear. Okay? That's power. And because he didn't rip everybody's heads off, that was power under control. So he's Gentle Ben. That makes sense. But meek is a war horse. Okay? And it's a specific act of meeking a horse. I love that. I love that. Okay, so moving on from this, next 3 verses, 4 through 6. This is all one sentence, 3 verses, but one sentence. And this is perhaps the number one sentence in the entire Bible about unity. Okay? There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs in your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all of us, who is above all and through all and in all. It's talking about unity. We are all together. Okay? The Pope John, let's put the quote up. Pope John the 23rd says, "What unites us is much greater than what divides us." Okay? We are not, as we sit here, all clones of each other. Okay? We have different likes, dislikes, different characters, all that kind of stuff. But what unites us, especially in the faith, all of those ones, okay, are the same. I'll point out one of the ones, plan on that, the one hope. Normally we think of hope as like an attitude or an emotion or something like that, but that's not what he's referring to here. He's referring to an objective future blessing that we await. The second coming of Christ and living with God forever. It's an objective event that is the hope. It's not that we hope in that hope. He's talking about that is the one hope that belongs to your call. Okay, so that's just a little extra in there. Now, the next little section here will go 7 through 11. This one is fun because I'm going to have to admit to you that I don't have the answers on this one.
Greg, can you just repeat that on hope?
On hope? The hope is not that we are hoping that that occurs. It's the event itself which is the hope that he's talking about. We all share that one hope, that event that is waiting for us. Okay, does that make sense? It's the event, not our attitude, not our wishing that it occurs. And you can sort of see where that word hope comes from in that sense. Okay, so back to 7 through 11. Did anybody, presuming that you read chapters 3 and 4 at home before you got here, seeing as I've been having it on screen anyway, right? You skip that part. This little section here, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives and he gave the gifts to men. And he said, all of this section here is really confusing. And if you were confused by it, you're in good company. The scholars are confused by it too. I've read a lot of different descriptions of what that means, and the one that rings truest to me, but I can't even put my stamp of approval on it for whatever that's worth, is to say that this little section here, when he ascended on high and led a host of captives, and this is translated differently in different translations, very differently in different translations. That comes from Psalm 68, verse 8, and it refers to when the Israelites were being led out of Egypt. Okay, so those who were slaves, those who were captivity, are being led out. So he's leading out the captives. And seeing as almost everything in the Old Testament is a foreshadowing of Christ, Paul has gone off on a little tangent here to talk about the fact that back then Christ himself was leading the captives out of captivity. Okay? That's the best understanding of it, or that's the one that rings truest to me. And then talking about, in saying he ascended, what does it mean that he had also descended into the lower parts of the earth? You can look at that two ways. One is that he condescended, he came from heaven, from high, down to earth to live with us. That's descended enough to be descended. But then you can also look at that as on Holy Saturday, while he was in the tomb, he descended even further to release the captives down there. Okay? So it's a bit of poetic language here. This is that language that's sometimes hard to grasp. And because different people have so many different ideas on it, I'm not convinced on this one personally. I gave you a quick description of the one that rang truest to me. But here's the interesting thing, as I was looking at this. If you take this middle section about this whole thing that's sort of a little bit confusing, and you sort of blank this out for a second. Now, I don't edit scripture. You notice the words are still under there. You can see them, right? But I'm just making a point. If you blank that out, look at this. But grace was given to each of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And his gifts were that some should be apostles, some prophets, some... It flows. It looks like Paul, in his oratory style, started talking about something, said, oh, wait, let me add this, and then got back to his main thought. That's what it looks like. So if we are confused about what's under this little placard here, we still got most of it, okay? Because this is easy to understand, and this is easy to understand. So that middle section, if it didn't quite satisfy you, I'm sorry, I can't do any better than what I just did. So that's that, gift to gift. And then when we... I can't remember what's on the next screen. Oh, see, I didn't even put that in there. We'll get there in a second. If we look just past that, verse 11 to verse 12, it's talking about that the ultimate goal of equipping the members for ministry is for building up the body of Christ. So all of those ministries that he talked about, all those gifts, ultimately is to build up the church. And specifically, if you go to verse 13, he's talking about specifically leading the members to the unity of the faith. Unity of the faith. If you've got an NEV, it says unity of faith. Just technically correct. The RSV says unity of the faith, which is more correct. What Paul is talking about here is the corporate faith. All of us together, our faith. And if we're in sync with one another, the body of Christ, okay? Not that we have, as Paul likes to say, the hand and the arm and the kidney and all these other parts going in all different directions, that we're all sort of together. So we're so used to hearing about, spiritual maturity and thinking about it as a personal quest, right? That we strive to get a little better every day, so that we make ourselves a little better every day, a little bit more mature, being the fullness of what was meant to be for us. Okay? We're so used to thinking about personal maturity, personal spiritual maturity. But that's not what Paul's talking about here. He's talking about the corporate. He's talking about the body of Christ, this parish, this diocese, being of all one mind and working together and having that unity of the faith. Okay? Because just after this, because here the emphasis on, just before this, here the emphasis on the church. Yes?
The part that you blocked out, I think what Paul was trying to convey is
I was going to ask if anybody had an idea. Go ahead, yes.
Is that the gifts, so when you blocked it out, you said the beginning and the bottom was the gifts, is also going to be applied retroactively to the people who came before he came to earth. So
Yes.
that's why he descended down and he brought all of them up, and they're going to get that gift too.
Right. And that goes to that atemporal, fun word, that non-time part of God, right? There was a moment in time, our time, where the ransom was paid with Christ on the cross. But of course the people before couldn't receive that because they lived in a time prior to that. But God, being outside of time, can still apply that to the people before. So thanks, I appreciate it, because that was one of the other things that I had read, but I didn't quite understand it that way. Thanks. Yes.
Isn't that the meaning of descended into hell
Yes.
in the Apostles' Creed? Because all of those, in those times, everybody was like in hell.
Right.
They didn't have the Redeemer.
Right. And I don't want to go off on hell and limbo right now, but the folks that were destined for heaven really didn't go to hell. They were in limbo. They were in a waiting room, doing whatever they were doing for hundreds or thousands of years, or perhaps a blink of an eye to them, until Christ said, okay, now the gates are open. But I had to do this in time because it had to make logical sense. So you guys had to wait here. It was air conditioning, it was okay, it was fine, but he went and rescued them at the right time. But yes. And by the way, when you mention when we say the creed every week, that also ties into the unity of the church. That is something that is the unity of the faith. We say it so often that sometimes, if we're not paying attention, we don't realize how much is crammed into those 45 seconds or so when we say this, when we say the creed. There's a tremendous amount of information in that, and we all agree with it. Yes.
The Nicene did away with it. He just was died and buried.
Right.
And the third era is according to Scripture. But the original, of course, they wanted to make sure that he went down. He would rescue everybody.
Correct. So, and that goes to the unity, and that goes through verses 14, 15, and 16, where Paul is talking a lot about truth, speaking truth, avoiding deceit, staying away from that, and being knit together. Again, that unity part. Yes?
When he's referring to the faith or the body of Christ, is it proper to extend that to the organized religion of being Catholic? Or is he speaking more just the body of Christ and the people who follow Christianity?
Are you saying, I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Are you saying that is Paul excluding those that are outside the Catholic faith? I don't think he is.
No, is that something we can as Catholics look at and say the faith, the church?
Yeah, I think I think the way Rome calls it is the separated brethren, right? The folks that we wish were with us, we wish had access to all of the sacraments, we wish had access to the sacred tradition that we still respect, but they're separated. But I still consider them on our team. Look at the world today. I like people that are on our team. Okay, they're on our team. We don't have everything in common, but we're pretty close. Go back to that quote from Pope John the 23rd, right? What unites us is far greater than what divides us. Okay, those people are on our team. Okay, the ones Anyway, I won't go any further than that. I can go off on that for a long time. Did I answer your question? Okay, yes.
The Apostles' Creed right now, they rewrote it and said, he descended into hell. That was one of the dead people. It wasn't negative hell. But right now, the Apostles' Creed, a couple years ago, they changed it. Said Christ descended into hell. The third day he arose and ascended into heaven. The Apostles' Creed does say he descended into hell.
Yes.
But it's not the hell that we look at.
Right. It's not the place of punishment. He's just saying the netherworld.
They call hell.
Right. You got hell,
Place of death.
Sheol, and all of another world. You got all sorts of different ways you can say it. The simplest way, and what apparently got in there, was hell. But we know that anybody that Jesus went down there to rescue were the ones that, if you want to call it by today's standards, would be going to heaven. So he retroactively, going back to your atemporal idea, goes down and rescues those people. Okay? So, yes, that's true. That's true. It was predetermined that those people were going to be with him. He just had to go make it happen at the right time. So he had to be down in time at the right time to make it make sense to all of us. Because we live in an intelligible universe. If he did things all atemporally, we'd be all confused. Or maybe we'd understand what's going on. I don't know. Anyway, so if we look at those first 16 verses of chapter 4, where he's saying, be meek and lowly and avoid deceit and all these different things. Okay, what does a mature parish look like? Remember, mature being that which is grown into adulthood. It is what it is supposed to be. When a parish is doing what it's supposed to be, what does Paul say are the attributes that go along with that? Okay, if we look at the first, does anybody want to take a stab at it? I've obviously got this prepared, so I've got 3 things that are going up there. But does anybody want to take a stab at what he says is important? I knew somebody was going to come up with that word, unity. You are absolutely right. In fact, that's intuitive. In the first one, unity in relationships, right? Right at the beginning, he's talking about humility, meekness, gentleness, kindness, love, bearing with one another, all that kind of stuff. That comes right out of verses 2 and 3. Then he talks about unity. I'm sorry?
I thought love was in there somewhere.
Yes, actually love is in there. I forgot. I
Yeah.
didn't throw that in. You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Then there's unity and stability in doctrine. Okay? That's the idea of the corporate idea of maturing in faith, in maturing in the faith.
Yeah.
Not just that we all have faith, but we all have roughly the same understanding of the faith. That's unity of the faith. We can all be believers and have wildly different understandings of what's going on. We wouldn't quite be in unity then, right? Especially if we sat down and started talking about things that were really totally off, okay? So unity of the faith, unity and stability in doctrine. He talks about that in 13 through 15. Avoid deceit and all that stuff that creeps in. And then there's the idea of fruitful ministry. Those gifts that are given specifically to benefit the church, that is supposed to be coming back in. Gifts that are meant to benefit the church, that's ministry. Okay? Using the gifts that are given to the members under the guidance of the pastor and other leaders that are there. Okay? And that shows up in verse 8, verse 11 and 12, verse 16. Take my word for it. The notes are there. It's there. You can look at it for yourself. So that's that. So if we go past this, and we're wrapping up chapter 4 as we get here. Right after this, we get to verse 17. I happen to enjoy 17. Why is my Bible all over here? Okay, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. Says, "Now I affirm and testify in the Lord that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do." Who is he preaching to? The Gentiles. He's insulting them? Okay? Does this make sense? He says elsewhere, I can't remember where it is, I become all things to all people so that I might win some, right? I think that's beautiful. I can't remember where it is. I know I've said that from the lectern at Mass. I like that one, okay? So he tries to blend in is not the right word. assimilate, anyway, he tries not to be offensive, okay? So here he's saying, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, you Gentiles.
Yeah.
Okay?
But
Yes?
the people he was writing to would have been converted.
Exactly. Paul doesn't consider these people Gentiles anymore. They were Gentiles. They're now, even though the word hadn't been invented yet, they're now Christians. Okay? So he's saying, remember your old life, remember the people you ran with, remember what they were doing? You can't do that anymore.
Right.
You shouldn't do that anymore. You did not learn that in Christ. Don't do that anymore. So it's not an insult. He doesn't consider them Gentiles anymore. And presumably, they know what he's talking about, so they're not being insulted by this. But I got a kick out of this when I read this. You must no longer live as you. But then you stop and think, and you get that point. Okay? Now I'm going to touch on something really quickly, and we're going to talk about it at length next week, because I love this subject as well. Verse 18 talks about, starting from 17, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. There's a lot to digest there, okay? There's the idea of light and dark, which the Bible uses all the time, that poetic language of children of the light, children of the dark. Folks that are following good, folks that are following not so good, okay? And children of the dark don't necessarily mean people that are actively following evil, okay? Evil, I keep saying, God is a gentleman. God won't pull you. If you're just standing there and wanting to be by yourself, God won't pull you. He'll give you graces and give you opportunities, but he won't pull you. If you're just standing there, the devil will pull. So you can't just drift through life. You will be pulled, okay? So children of the light are people that are actively following God. Children of the dark are people that are drifting, who are being pulled, and people who are actively evil. Two different categories of people that are darkened like that. But he's saying they're darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God, that makes sense, because of the ignorance that is in them. Ignorance isn't necessarily a bad word. Okay? Ignorance just means you don't know. Okay? It's not really a bad word. But they're ignorance due to the hardness of their heart. They're not opening up their heart to let God in, to let Christ in, to let the message in, to adopt that worldview that we talked about last week. Okay? That hardness of heart. The Greek word that is translated into hardness is porosis, as in osteoporosis. Okay? Osteoporosis is the brittle thing that breaks easily. Okay? Bad enough when it's your bones, much worse when it's your heart. Okay? So that Greek word porosis is in there. We're going to talk a lot about that darkened in understanding and the fact that the people that have their will darkened simply cannot understand the truth. They simply can't understand it. Sometimes it's not that they're actively opposed to it. You can explain it to them all day long, they just don't get it. We'll talk about that at length next week. If I go off on that, we won't have anything to talk about. No, there's plenty to talk about next week. Next week's going to be fun. I like chapter 5. So throughout this section and towards this and in there, what kind of emphasis does Paul put on truthful speech? Do you think that's a good thing? You think it's like a necessary part of life that's good for the church? It's good for you. That's crucial. He hits it over and over again from all sorts of different angles, right? Avoiding deceit, but also actively speaking truthfully. It's all in there. Okay. Verse 22. I thought was interesting. It says, put off your old nature, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful lusts. Corrupt, isn't it enough to say corrupt through lusts? Now, we talked about, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, that it was the first week, that sins of the flesh, sarx, is both body and mind. So these lusts can be both bodily lusts and mental, right? Anger and frustration, all those things. So it could be both of those. But it says, put off that old nature because it's corrupt through deceitful lusts. Father Gavin and I had a lunch several years ago at this point, back when he was down at Ascension, and he and I were having lunch, and as we do, we sometimes go off on these theological tangents and just sort of, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And we just sort of try and pick it apart, let's figure out what God thinks, right? And the topic for that day, we were at Mississippi Sweets having some ribs and some, doesn't really factor into the story, but that's what we were. We were sitting there, and I can't remember exactly how the conversation got here, but we started talking about whether or not there will be free will in heaven. Why, Greg, would you ask that question? Well, free will, as we've already discussed tonight, can lead to evil, right? We are given free will so that when we do good, it's actually good, but it leaves open the door to do bad, and there is no bad in heaven. So can we have free will in heaven and still have heaven perfectly clean? Yes?
Satan did, he had a free will,
But he was in.
rebelled against God, wasn't he in heaven?
No.
But he was
He's cast
in-
out. He may have been there
No,
before he
was in
rebelled.
heaven.
Yeah.
I'm saying, he was in heaven.
But he
and they
wasn't
had the free
human.
will.
But then he was cast out.
He was
Right.
angel.
Right. So, and I think that was before God set up the human heaven. So the angels were up there in the heavenly places. Okay? But none of those bad angels ever set foot on where we're going. Okay? So human heaven is perfect, always will be, and you can't kick somebody out of heaven. So can you give them free will and assure that they will not sin?
Yes.
How?
Because you have no temptation.
Why? I'm going to keep asking you questions so you hit the one I'm looking for.
Because the temptation comes from the evil, came from the devil.
And came from the deceit.
Yeah.
Right.
It comes from us believing lies. Sin comes when we believe that something that we want is a good when it's not a good. We have been lied to directly by the demons. We've been lied to by culture. We've been lied to wherever. Okay? So when he says you have been corrupted through your deceitful lusts, you're thinking something is good, a pleasure or what have you, but it's not a good. So can you have free will and still go to heaven? Or can there be free will in heaven? Yes. If we all attend a remedial RCIA before we get to heaven and really learn what is good and what is bad and really take it to heart this time, okay? You think I'm joking, but okay. If I had, I don't know. Some of you may have heard this before. Some of you may have not. Have any of you heard that it's really not a good idea to pour sugar in a gas tank of a car? Have any of you heard that?
Yeah.
Okay. If you haven't heard that, it's a really bad thing. It can gum things up. Then I talked to a mechanic who says, it's not that big a deal. Anyway, let's just take it for what it is. Okay? If you pour sugar in a gas tank, that's a really bad thing, right? You're not going to do that. When you go home tonight, you have sugar in the cupboard, right? Do you have the free will, the power, the ability to take that sugar, go into your garage or go into your driveway and pour it into your gas tank? Do you have the free will to do that? Are you going to?
No.
Because you know it's not something good. What if all the sins that we're tempted by, we know that well, they're not good for us? Then we can go to heaven, have free will. We're not going to do it. You are corrupted by your deceitful lusts. We're being lied to, folks. And it's not just on the mainstream media. Sorry, didn't mean to go there. Anyway, so I shouldn't have gone there. Okay, so then in verse 30 it says, do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, which means do not disrupt unity. But then notice when it says do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, notice that only a person can be grieved or saddened. He's saying there the Holy Spirit is a person. He doesn't specifically say it's one of the three persons of the Trinity, but he's saying the Holy Spirit is a person, not just a spirit person. And then, even though I said we're covering chapters 3 and 4, this section actually ends at the very beginning of chapter 5. The first 2 verses of chapter 5 ends this section. And they're nice 2 verses, so I'll read them to you, even though you didn't read them ahead of time, unless you happen to know that the paragraph didn't end yet. So anybody read the last 2 because you noticed the paragraph hadn't ended yet? Or you just stop at the end of chapter 4?
I started.
No, I started reading.
Huh?
I kept reading.
Okay, good. So the very end of this section, which is actually the beginning of chapter 5, says, therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And that's how he wraps up chapter 4. So with all of this, I'll hit one last thing, and then we're done. I've got no idea what time it is, so if I've run over, I apologize. What time is it?
7:40.
What?
7:40.
oh my gosh, we're doing good. We got lots of time for Q&A. But I got to finish this last little section. Paul talked a lot about being deceived and truth. And there's just a personal note. I've spent much of the last 10, maybe 15 years trying to figure out, okay, I'll back up, I'll explain. I told you the first time we got together, I spent the first 48 years of my life without faith. One of the couple of different things, I won't get into the long thing, but one of the things that sort of pushed me towards faith was that I'm a math and science guy. I love facts, I love understanding things, I love gathering data and understanding everything. And there was something in my heart that made me realize that the world has stopped dealing in facts, stopped dealing in truth. And I was missing it somehow. Really wasn't conscious of it, but I felt it somehow. I figured this out afterward, that I was attracted to this book. Because somewhere in my unbelieving, but wanted to believe, somewhere in my unbelieving heart, I said, if there's any truth left in this world, it's going to be found in here. There might be something in addition to this, but if there's one last thing on earth that's true, it's going to be in here. And that comes from somebody who did not have faith. And that's part of what walked me towards faith. So I've spent much of the last 10, maybe 15 years with that feeling in my heart. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to discern truth from a lie. This world, internet. Anybody that has an internet connection can proclaim to have all the answers to the world, and they're living out of a basement somewhere, and they can look like, the world's greatest authority. How do you discern between truth and a lie? When this is the front of my Bible falling apart. Sorry, I got to clean that up before I leave. But I feel bad looking anyway. So how do you tell the difference between a truth and a lie? Everybody can look good, they have nice websites or speak authoritatively or whatever else like that. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to affirm a truth. It's very hard. Lies sometimes you can catch because they logically don't make sense with something else that you know is a fact. So when you see something that doesn't line up, you can figure out lies. But how do you affirm truth? It's hard to do. The thing that guided me towards it was, go to the first page of Ephesians and then turn back one page. You were here before.
Yep.
Galatians, end of Galatians. There's a section in chapter 5, the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. That's what's up here now. Galatians 5:19 through 21 talks about the works of the flesh. And we talked about this twice actually last week, right? Immorality, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, rivalry, jealousy, outbursts of fury, acts of selfishness, dissensions, factions, occasions of envy, and it goes on for another two that don't apply right now. And then the fruits of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Gentleness being that meek word. I like this so much, I had it put on a custom mug for me. It has Greg on the front and that verse on the back. I love it. It's a weird thing. This Bible has obviously been used quite a lot, and the cover hasn't held up the way it's supposed to. This page that I keep going back and forth on happens to be, and has been for like the last 10 years, the only page that is ripped in my entire Bible. Somehow, a long time ago, I ripped this page somehow. And it's taped together. I don't know if you can see the tape. About 6-7 years ago, down where I live, a little bit south of where I live actually, in Broward, because I don't live in Broward, there was a first-class relic of Pope St. John Paul II, traveling. First-class relic. This was a container of his blood. And my wife and I, Lucy, went to go see it. Because I knew, one of the things I happen to know about first-class relics, because I'm a Catholic nut, is that a first-class relic, when touched to another object, the other object becomes a third-class relic. Right? So I brought along my Bible, because it was important to me. So we got in line and we went through. There wasn't a whole lot of people there, which was actually kind of sad. And there was a nun that was in charge of the first-class relic. So she was the one that held it, right? And I went up and introduced myself, said hi, all that kind of stuff, gave her a little bit of information. She asked a couple of questions. And I asked her to touch the Bible, and I had it open to this page. This was important to me. And this little nun took that first class relic, and I thought, no, turn the page. It's not where it ripped. Then went into the other section. Rub the front, rub the back, rub the inside front cover, rub the inside. I mean, she went nuts on this thing. This thing is seriously a third-class relic. I mean, I'm serious. Okay, it might even get to a second. No, it's not. But I mean, dude, she went crazy on this thing. It was amazing. It was like something overtook her. She really wanted to infuse this Bible, which was kind of fun. Which is why I haven't traded it out, even though it's falling apart. I love this thing. But why are these two verses so important to me? This is one of my gauges, perhaps the best gauge, of finding out whether or not something that I'm hearing is truth or a lie. If the person that's talking is demonstrating some of these qualities, it's coming from the flesh. It's coming from the sarx, right? The Greek word, sarx. It's coming from that part. That's not of the Spirit, therefore it's quite possibly a lie. But if this is what they're displaying as they're talking to me, that's the fruit of the Spirit. The Spirit's in charge of truth. That, to me, is my best truth detector and lie detector. Okay? Now, there's two caveats I'll throw out there. If this happened to appeal to you, and it wasn't just a story that Greg is wrapping up this week's Bible study, if that happened to appeal to you, I'll throw out two caveats. Number one is that news anchors aren't really emotionally invested in what they're reading. So you may not see this, even though the person that wrote the original story is displaying this or this. You can't really tell. So forget it with news anchors. You can't really use that. It just doesn't work. It only works when you're hearing somebody talk off the cuff, because it's coming out. Either this is coming out or this is coming out. That's number one. Number two is anger is sometimes righteous. You can be over here and be angry. In the readings, right, Paul says, be angry but do not sin. You can be angry and not sin. If you're angry about a sin, if you are angry about something that is immoral, that's righteous anger. That's fine. You don't act out of anger, but you can be angry. So if you sense anger, that doesn't necessarily put them over here. Okay, so I just throw out that caveat. Okay, news media doesn't necessarily work because they're not emotionally invested most of the time, unless they're a pundit. Maybe they are. And then anger doesn't necessarily disqualify somebody. Those are the only two things that I've thought of over all these years that sort of you got to watch out for this. But this is a nice little truth detector, because the Spirit is in charge of truth, and that's what you can see.